Come on, bro. Come on, bro. Get me in here. Get me in here. Get me in here. Come on, man. Yeah, bro. World servers is down, man.
Unlucky.
The 52, bro. The 52 is the downfall. Server's too big. Time to get on some homework, I guess. Area 52 has collapsed.
Now that we understand factors that drive bond yields and central bank rate setting, we are ready to discuss the yield curve, a visual representation of the cost of borrowing. Let's bring up two Bloomberg screens simultaneously. First, let's type World Bond Markets and select WB to see the yields on the most important government bonds. Then, let's bring up the yield curve by typing yield curve into the command line and selecting the Graph Curves or GC function. This is the United States government yield curve. The x-axis is the bond's maturity, ranging from 1 month all the way to 30 years. The y-axis is the bond's yield, the interest rate that an investor would get per year from holding that bond for the full life of the bond. The x-axis of the yield curve confuses many people. It does not signify the passage of time, but rather bonds of varying maturities. This chart, therefore, simply takes the yields on various U.S. government bonds at the same moment in time and plots their yields. At this point in time, the two screens show us that 2-year U.S. yields are 0.416%, 5-year are 1.574%, 10-year are 2.402%, and 30-year are 3.192%. The first thing you notice about the yield curve is that it is upwardly sloping, or positive slope, with the shorter maturity bonds to the left having markedly lower yields than the longer maturity bonds to the right. You already know why long-term debt is more expensive to borrowers. There is a greater chance of the borrower going bust, and the lender is more exposed to the corrosive effects of inflation. In addition, inflation becomes harder to predict the further into the future you are trying to predict it. Let's pull up the economic forecast function, ECFC, once more and look at the inflation forecast for the United States taken in mid-2017. As we can see, analysts estimated that 2017 inflation would be between 1.5% and 3.7%. For 2019, the band of estimates was broader, ranging from a low of 1.8% to a high of 4.5%. Imagine the uncertainty over 30 years. No wonder 30-year bonds have higher yields than 2-year bonds. At this point in time, the curve is that it is upwardly sloping, or positive slope, with the shorter maturity bonds to the left having markedly lower yields than the longer maturity bonds to the right. You already know why long-term debt is more expensive to borrowers. There is a greater chance of the borrower going bust, and the lender is more exposed to the corrosive effects of inflation. In addition, inflation becomes harder to predict the further into the future you are trying to predict it. Let's pull up the economic forecast function, ECFC, once more and look at the inflation forecast for the United States taken in mid-2017. As we can see, analysts' estimates The difference between the yield on the longer maturity bonds and shorter maturity bonds is called the term premium. This is the extra yield that investors demand for holding longer-term bonds. On the screen shown, the 10-year to 3-month term premium is 2.374 percentage points, which is the 10-year yield minus the 3-month yield. We saw in the Economic Indicators module how investors maintain economic estimates on ECFC. We saw in the Currencies module currency pair estimates on FXFC. In the same way, analysts maintain estimates on bond yields. Let's type bond yield forecasts into the command line and select the BYFC function. Taking the US, for example, here we can see forecasts all along the yield curve for the Fed funds target rate, 3-month rates, 2-year rates, 5-year rates, 10-year rates, and 30-year rates. The yield curve seems obscure to newcomers to finance. It is anything but. It represents the cost of borrowing, and therefore it reverberates throughout the markets and the world economy. We already caught a glimpse of this earlier with the Amazon analogy. When the Fed alters the left-hand end of the yield curve, short-term interest rates, it affects prices and yields of the whole $101 trillion bond market. Let's discuss how the yield curve impacts corporations, consumers, and the world economy. First, corporate impact. Almost all corporate investment projects are multi-year. They are therefore typically funded with medium or long-term borrowing to match the project duration. Lenders to companies face the same risks as lenders to governments. Short-term interest rates may rise and inflation may rise, both of which will...
Area 52 just completely